Hear that? That's the sound of a patient whose health data is protected from a cyber attack. And that's the sound of a financial system that's digitally secured from bad actors. Right now, there's an invisible war being fought on a digital battlefield that impacts what we do every day. That's why at Peraton, we do the can't be done to help protect the vital systems we rely on. Because if we don't, the alternative is unimaginable. Peraton.
Hey, it's Matt from the Direct-to-Video Connoisseur here. Thanks again for listening to the DTVC podcast. Before we jump in, I wanted to quickly let you know that my new novel, A Girl and a Gun, is available on Amazon now, both on Kindle and paperback. It follows Justin, a successful writer whose past as a scriptwriter for a fetish porn site comes back to haunt him and threatens to derail his career. As he's picking up the pieces, he gets an opportunity to make a movie called A Girl and a Gun with a rom-com star. Justin may have bitten off more than he can chew, though, because she's notoriously difficult to work with. If you're interested, you can find the link on our webpage, along with the link to my first novel, Chad in Accounting. If you have any questions, please reach out, and I thank you for the support. Now, on to the podcast. The Direct Video Connoisseur podcast. As always, this is Matt here, and today I'm joined by a very special guest. I have Tom Joliffe, who is a screenwriter who wrote a recent film, When Darkness Falls. Also wrote film Renegade, which is coming out this fall from Shogun Films, and then also you write articles for Flickering Myth. Welcome, Tom. And actually, did I pronounce your last name correctly?
Close. It's Joliffe, so it doesn't sound anywhere near as fancy as it looks.
Okay,
yeah,
John.
so,
yeah. I realized after I hit record that we probably should have discussed that before I hit record. How to pronounce your last name? Because the same thing happens with my last name. People will have trouble with it. It's Poirier, but it can also be French or Poirier. So it's always a different pronunciation.
Yeah, I get that as well. I think some people assume it's French. I mean, it is based off a French name, but they give it a very kind of French pronunciation sometimes.
Yeah, that's mine too. Because it's been Americanized over however many generations here. I guess anglicized maybe is the right term. Poirier, it's just people can't be bothered with the French, which I get. I'm happy with it that way too. All right, excellent. Well, yeah. Now, I think we'll chat about When Darkness Falls first. I think it's a film that just came out recently. It's available to rent here in the U.S. on Prime, I believe, and I think probably the same in the U.K.
Just in the U.S. at the moment, and
okay.
We'll have a release date upcoming for the U.K. pretty soon. So I think at the moment the U.S. has got an exclusive window.
Okay.
Around about 3 months, I think.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting because I just saw somebody, a director, Jay Horton, that I follow. He had just done an interview with somebody with a distribution company about distribution rights and that kind of thing. Is that something where you have to sort of sign a deal with Amazon, or is that you have your own distribution company that has the deal like that?
So we had it signed to a distributor in the US, Desktop, and they've basically then put it out through a number of channels. So Amazon first, and then I think around about September, it's going to go to sort of Tubi and things like that. So it'll be on sort of advertising video on demand, whereas at the moment it's kind of transactional pay-per-view.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah,
that kind of makes sense too here in the U.S. because it does seem like that's the process with a lot of new movies, that they start out on pay-per-view and then eventually they move into Tubi. I think probably the most recent example that I can think of here in the U.S. is Castle Falls, the Dolph Lundgren, Scott Adkins movie.
Yeah. I think I'm not too sure what it is, but I think a lot of distributors now are kind of staggering their releases. So yeah, sometimes they'll release it through one channel, then like a few months later it'll be another, just so it kind of spreads out. And I guess if they release everything at once at the same time, there's a worry that maybe it kind of just tails off completely after a certain time. So I think they're just trying to hit different windows.
Yeah, that makes sense, because I imagine like if something's available on Tubi, with free with advertising, or it's available to rent on Prime in the US, people will choose Tubi for the most part, at least the people that know of Tubi.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think almost, also you get the kind of, once it's fresh out on something, there's you kind of get to the forefront of the search results and things like that. So it's kind of makes sense, I guess, to stagger it over, say, 6-7 months.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think another film that you wrote recently is on Tubi. What was the name of it? It was Van Helsing.
Okay,
Razzle Van Helsing. Yeah.
I didn't even realize that was on Tubi already. So yeah, that's good to know.
Yeah, it's interesting because the IMDb entry for it. Let me see if this is the case. I think this is the case, that the IMDb entry doesn't list a director for that film.
No, I think the producers do so many films that essentially a lot of the filmmakers or the crew, you've got to really be able to do the IMDb yourself. So I mean, there's been a few occasions with a few of the films I've done where I've had to kind of update myself and put my name on. One of the producers, Scott Jeffrey, I've worked with him through 3 or 4 different companies. So he produced Van Helsing, and he must do about 20 films a year at the moment. And for the most part, he would be the one, maybe 1 or 2 of the other producers, who would deal with the IMDb page.
That makes sense. Yeah, it's funny because there was a I don't know if he was a manager or a producer. He worked with Mel Novak, actor. Does a lot of low budget stuff here in the U.S. And he would sometimes want me, because he would get the movie on IMDb, but to get it on Letterboxd, you have to put it on the movie database. And so he was asking me if I could do that for him. So I did. There's a couple of Mel Novak's movies. Like I think there's like a Shark Attack movie or something like that.
Oh, was that Dustin Ferguson, is it?
Yes, was the director for them. Yeah, I believe. Yeah, exactly. And so so I kind of put all the information on the movie database, and then it went on to Letterboxd. And so and then I was doing the podcast I did with Rich Hawes about Absolute Force and Total Force. He was like, yeah, one of these movies isn't even on Letterboxd. And I was like, oh, well, I know how to do that now. So I got the information from IMDb and put it on there myself on the movie database.
Yeah, I think there's just such a massive content at the moment, so that's not really surprising. Yeah, and there's loads of different titles with my films, so a lot of them often change title and they don't get updated on IMDb either. So I think on IMDb, it's not. So I think it's called Van Helsing: Hunter of the Damned, but on IMDb it's still listed as Wrath of Van Helsing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's interesting too. So, I mean, when it comes to those title changes, is that something where they just sort of look at it and think like, well, this title won't sell, or it sounds too much? It doesn't either sounds too much like something or not enough like something to arouse interest?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I never quite know the logic sometimes. I mean, the first trailer for it was just called Van Helsing. So I think at some stage, one of the territories or one of the distributors was probably considering just having a plain Van Helsing title, but I think they've obviously gone back and thought, it's going to get confused with the Hugh Jackman film. Mm-hmm. So yeah, they must have added in Hunter of the Damned.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's funny with that. My wife and I were watching Goodfellas recently. With Ray Liotta passing, we thought, and we tend to watch that movie a good amount anyway. But I found out that Martin Scorsese was originally going to call it Wise Guy after the book that it was based on, but he didn't want it to be connected with the TV show Wise Guy that was popular at that time with Ken Wall. And it's one of those things that you don't even really think about, like, Wise Guy, that show has been gone for decades now. And, of course I remember that it existed, but I wouldn't have thought that a movie like Goodfellas would be afraid of being connected. But of course, at that time, he didn't want people to think it was the movie adaptation of the TV show.
Yeah, it's just a funny way the business works sometimes, and then you'll see other titles that just constantly get reused. I know the Jesse Johnson one was a bit confusing. I think with Debt Collector, then Debt Collectors. There's a bit of confusion there, really, between the first and the second one, and some of the titles on the different territories. And I think the second one in the UK was called Payback, so they just went a completely different route with the title on that one.
Yeah, because I think in the US, when that movie went to Netflix, when Netflix picked that up, they did change the title to Debt Collectors 2, or Debt Collector 2, I think.
Yeah, if I remember, I think they did.
Yeah, that's the other thing too, right? Is that, from an artist standpoint, whether it's the director, writer, there's an idea of like the title is a part of the art involved. I was thinking about the recent Shogun films, Nemesis. It's almost impossible to look that movie up on IMDb because there are so many films called Nemesis, and it doesn't show up in the search engine. Yeah,
well, I guess you've got the Star Trek, and then obviously the Albert Pune film as well.
Yeah, and then there's just a ton of other indie films called Nemesis that I think with that being like the first effort from Shogun, I think that even with the names that are involved with the film, I think it just it didn't have the sort of the cachet to establish itself in the search engines bigger than that. So a lot of times I'll look up Billy Murray if I need to get to that movie, or Nick Moran, and go through their IMDb.
Yeah, it can be difficult sometimes because there's so few. There's not really any original titles you can that you're left with at this stage. And then, a lot of distributors, for the most part, they'll want a 1 or 2 word title. So it's difficult to find that one that catches and that hasn't been used already. I mean, we've got that with Renegades. There's a couple of films already. There's there's one a few years back, and then obviously a bit more famously, the Keith Sutherland and Lou Diamond Phillips film from the 80s. It's called Renegades, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's interesting because the film that we're going to be talking about, When Darkness Falls, there's also a lot of When Darkness Falls that have been out, but for some reason when I type that one into IMDb, it's the first one that comes up. It's the I guess it's by most recent, but maybe it's because I've searched it a couple times and it's remembering, but I mean, it should remember me searching Nemesis a few times, and it doesn't seem to do that there. So yeah,
I think when the films are kind of in that release stage, they tend to get a little bit of a boost up the search charts. I mean, we had a problem with When Darkness Falls on Amazon, just our placement up until about a week after, until it went up, and we were even placing below films that were called just Darkness Falls. Mm-hmm. So it's a bit odd, really, sometimes about where your placement is.
Yeah, and it's because thinking about the title of the film, I wouldn't think like another title would be better than When Darkness Falls. But it's almost like I think even with my 2 novels, my first one was called Chad and Accounting, and the second one was called A Girl and a Gun. And Chad and Accounting, there's no other Chad and Accountings on Amazon, so I can just tell people go look up Chad and Accounting. But A Girl and a Gun, there's 10 DVD sets of femme fatales and things like that are all over Amazon. So you really can't find it by searching A Girl and a Gun. And then of course my last name not being easy to spell, it's hard to direct people to where to find the novel, because it's either try to spell my name or look up A Girl and a Gun and not be able to find it in there. So that's a point for me where it's like, okay, when I self-publish other novels, do I want to have that be part of the calculus in the title? But then it's like, you're settled on a title that you really like. But like I said, I guess in your case, you write a movie and have a title for it, but in distribution they might just change it on you anyway.
Yeah, I think most of my titles have actually ended up being changed through the distributors. I mean, I did a film called Amityville Witches, and then when I was originally writing, there was nothing to do with Amityville at all. It was just this change that the distributors kind of requested halfway through writing it. They wanted to make it set in Amityville to cash in on, because they got Amityville Karen, Amityville in space, they got Amityville everything at the moment, so they wanted to get in on that as well.
Yeah, is that Witches of Amityville Academy? Is that the?
Yeah, so, I mean, originally it was called Witches of the Markham Academy, which was based off one of the characters in the story. But I think obviously Amityville Witches, which is where it is, that's what it's known as in most territories. I guess it's catchy, so it's done quite well as well. So it's it worked in the end anyway.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think like that kind of thing. I think like I think of like like the Blood Fist movies, for example. Where it was just like none of them really have to do with the first one or two Blood Fists that Don the Dragon did, but it's just sort of like, let's take an action movie that Don the Dragon Wilson's in, that Roger Corman's producing, and we'll just put the Blood Fist title on it. Or now it's like, think of a movie like Hard Target 2, with Scott Adkins, that really doesn't have anything to do with the first Hard Target, but it's like, that's a title that people recognize and see. And I guess if you're going through the myriad options on Tubi, and you're looking for a horror film that night, and you see something about Amityville, you might think, oh, okay, yeah, let's check that out.
Yeah, I think that must be the thinking of it, and it's a nice kind of punchy 2-word title as well. Yeah. Whereas I think my first working title would have just got completely lost, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? I think like, so for me, I think when I'm choosing films on Tubi, a lot of times it's who's in the movie, because I think of like by Hall of Fame and on the site and things like that, and it's sort of like, okay, let's see who's does this have Dolph in it? Does it have Gary Daniels in it? Something like that. And so that in that case, I'm looking for a specific actor, which I guess that's part of the calculus too, right? Is if you've got a name actor for a few pages worth of script, a day's worth of shooting or whatever, you can use them on the cover to also draw people. And I guess that's like the whole thing with a lot of the Bruce Willis movies that are out now.
Yeah, I think at the moment you've got kind of two ways to do films, and one is like the concepts, which sells. I think that's still predominantly the case with horror, where you don't necessarily need a big name quite so much. But I think with action films and thrillers, in terms of what distributors are after, they tend to want at least one or two names attached.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think especially, the Bruce Willis factor. I'm always, we kind of know now that with his health, that was a big reason why I think people that he was friends with in the industry were trying to get him in as many movies as possible, knowing that he probably wouldn't be able to make any after a certain point. So it kind of changes that mindset a bit. But a lot of times I'll watch the trailer of one of these Bruce Willis movies thinking like, boy, it looks like he's in this one a lot. And then and it's almost like a question of like, how do they edit the film in such a way that, or how do they take this concept here that I'm seeing in the trailer and actually turn it into a situation where he's not in the movie that much? Because a lot of times it seems like he's playing this really big part or key role from the trailer that when I watch the movie, it's like, oh, okay, that's how they're able to do that. That that character's not in 20 to 30 minutes of the film here at a time.
Yeah, I think they have to be quite clever with how they do it in terms of writing, and also where they're going to shoot it. I think I can't remember what one it was called, because there's been so many, but it's kind of set in the woods with Jamie King, I think, was in it.
Oh yes,
yeah. So Bruce Willis basically he walks around the woods quite a lot, and they've spread him out through the movie, and he'll have a few short dialogue scenes. So he's essentially pretty much entirely in a cabin, or he's out kind of wandering in the woods. And I think they've probably filmed him in 3 or 4 days, and then just very cleverly cut it through the whole film to sort of spread him out.
Yeah. That what is that? Survive the Game? Is that the one? No, that doesn't have James King in it.
No, not Survive the Game. I can't. There's been too many. I
I
can't
know
remember.
there's because I was like trying to think of it too.
Yeah.
Like with the James King part, I probably should be looking up James King instead of Bruce Willis, because I know I've seen that one. I've seen the trailer for it. I think the one that comes to mind for me was Acts of Violence. I think, yeah, Acts of Violence, where he plays a detective, and it seems like his detective character is going to be investigating this human trafficking ring from the trailer. So it just seems like, okay, well, this has got to have a bunch of Bruce Willis tracking, following up on leads and kicking in doors and all of that. But no, it's actually Cole Hauser that's doing all of that work, and he's just sort of liaising with Bruce Willis's character every once in a while.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was one of Bruce's films where he spends most of it tied to a chair.
Right. Yes. Yeah. There was a Twitter joke about that. Somebody had posted, like, I think there was like 4 movies that he had come out in a year or something like that, where all of them featured him tied to a chair for a good amount of the film.
Yeah, I think some of the way that they kind of target that is because it's easy to film. You can kind of, I know it must have been difficult, obviously, with his illness in terms of getting dialogue out, but I think the least sort of locations they can do where the least setups that they need, and then they can kind of spread it quite thin.
Yeah.
Whereas I think maybe they could have maybe done, well, not necessarily just with Bruce, but I mean with a few other actors that keep doing this as well, where it might be better off to have 2 or 3 scenes rather than 4 or 5, and then just do really good scenes.
Yeah.
But I guess what the distributors tend to want is if they've got someone in, they want them at the beginning, somewhere in the middle, and then they want them back at the end.
Yeah, that makes sense, right? Because if you're on Tubi, for example, right, if you drop off at some point, then if you drop off in the middle, all of the ad revenue for the second half of the film is missing.
Exactly. Yeah. So I mean, you'll pretty much always see like Willis or Mel Gibson at the moment seems to be doing this as well. So they'll always be at the beginning of the film or the start, within sort of 5 minutes.
Yeah, is that ever something from a screenwriter standpoint? Is there ever a situation where they're like, oh, you've written this character in the screenplay, but now we've got a name that we want to play it who's only going to be available for this amount of time? Is it a matter of like having to rewrite it so it's fewer pages or something? I don't know if that's something that they've ever come to you about, or if that's something that happens in the industry.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely does happen. I mean, I've had it as well. I mean, sometimes it becomes that, someone's available, and it might not even necessarily be that you change a role in the script. Sometimes you'll add a character in. So I mean, I had that quite recently with Danny Trejo.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So he became available for Renegades. He and a couple of other actors, so Michael Pare and then Tiny Lister, literally a few weeks really before he died.
Wow.
He was good. They were all good friends with Daniel Zerilli, the director, and they were available. It was kind of like just tailing off after COVID, and there was just like a brief window when everything was starting to be open again, or the restrictions were lowered. So it was just a case of, we need to film this in the States because the majority of the film was in the UK. So it's just like, we need characters that can fill a couple, a few scenes here and there. So it was just a case of writing them in some interesting characters and making use of that opportunity that came up.
So like when you're doing that, so then when they say, like, for example, they can't be in the UK, is that a matter of having to think like, okay, I've got to think of locations where, like a bar or something like that can be shot anywhere?
Yeah. So I mean, what happened was, fortunately, one of the British actors that is in Renegades actually lives in the US, so he was over there at the time. So we shot all the US stuff before the UK stuff. And he was over there, so he went round to film with Danny Trejo, and then by the time everything else was opened again and we can shoot the rest of it, the main bulk in the UK, he came over to shoot his part. So in the film itself, it's as if Danny Trejo is somewhere in the UK.
That kind of thing is always kind of really cool to know, because I think that's one of the things, right? When we watch the movie in the when sort of the finished product, we're kind of like, okay, yeah, how do you how do you get like a Danny Trejo who how does his character fit into a movie like that when he's maybe only going to be shooting for a short period of time, and like you said, he doesn't even go to the UK for his scenes.
Yeah, I think it's just that thing where there is the business side of it, but also from my point of view as a fan, it's just really exciting for me to write for these kind of actors. And I think because I've seen so many of their films, I feel like I know how to get the best out of them. So that was always in our thinking, that we didn't just want to get them in and try and just cram them in somewhere. We wanted to make the most of them as well, which I don't think is always the case. I think sometimes it's just the case, just get them in and then, we'll pump out a few pages or whatever. But I think certainly because I've watched so many Trejo films and Michael Pare, Tiny Lister, that I wanted to sort of, give them an interesting scene to do.
Yeah, that makes a lot. That makes a lot of sense. Just thinking about like having seen Nemesis, which I as of us recording this, I haven't reviewed it yet on the site, but I felt like there's a kind of a lot of like real sort of earnestness in making the film, like that we're going to make something that's really good and get it out there, and not have it be sort of I think the modern DTV world is a lot of like, let's just go out to some location in Alabama or Louisiana or something and get as many, pump out a few of these at a time and just sort of put some elements together and keep it there. There is, again, like you said, like there's the part of it that, getting the distribution, it helps to have names like Danny Trejo involved. But then, splitting the difference where it's like, okay, yes, we only got Danny Trejo for a short amount of time, but let's give him something quality that when someone like myself, or in your case, I know you're a fan as well. Like you watch it and you say, yeah, I actually really like Danny Trejo's part here. He really added something to the film.
Yeah, I mean that's my preference when I see actors in these kind of films. I mean, there's some actors that they'll always deliver a good performance. They're quite passionate about what they do, even if they're kind of getting quite prolific. Mm-hmm. I think Mel Gibson very rarely drops below a certain level. He's always quite into what he's doing. So I think it's good to make the most of them. I don't think that's always the case with some of the studios, though. I think they just sometimes they're thinking too much about what can we do that's going to be really kind of easy to shoot, and how can we get them to shoot very quickly and spread them out across the film. So they're going for the quantity of minutes to how much time they've got to shoot it. Whereas maybe they should go for quality in the scenes.
Yeah. I mean, obviously this is sort of like a sort of more extreme example, but thinking of Apocalypse Now, where Marlon Brando's barely in that movie, but the scenes that he's in are so powerful that he gets nominated for supporting actor Oscar. And so there is a way to do these really short scenes. I mean, obviously, again, that's like kind of the most extreme example I think of that, but the idea is the same, that if you've got Danny Trejo for a short amount of time, and I think that was one of the things when I saw on Instagram that Daniel Zerilli had joined Shogun Films. That was one of the things that I was kind of excited about, is that I know he has a kind of a stable of actors that he works with, or actresses that he works with, that he can kind of draw from. And that was kind of my my thinking was like, oh, we're maybe get some really big names. Nemesis had really great names to begin with that I really liked and was excited about. So I was kind of really keen to see what was going to happen with that, and that's why I'm really excited to see what Renegades is going to be like.
Yeah, same here. I think the other producer, Jonathan Sothcott, who runs Shogun with his wife, he's got a bit of a stable as well. So he knows loads of actors. So he connects it with people like Nick Moran, Bruce Payne. So I mean, obviously, just prior to Daniel kind of coming on board, they were in development on Nemesis. So Jonathan put that one together. In terms of Renegades, Daniel, he brings those kind of names like Danny and Michael Pare over as well. So it's it's quite exciting, the pair of them kind of working together to kind of bring all these names together. And Renegades turned from being what was going to be a bit more of a sort of, I guess, British style action thriller. It became a bit more international, with Daniel's involvement as well. So yeah, he opened that up a bit more, and I think we made it a bit more expansive after that.
Yeah, because that's one of the things I marked out with Nemesis. I mean, I thought Nick Moran in particular, that was like one of my favorite performances of his there in Nemesis. But I mean, I think across the board, I mean, you know, his wife Janine had a really great performance, and she doesn't have a huge CV on IMDb, so it was like kind of a lot of really great performances there. But yeah, seeing him, Billy Murray, you know, of course, yeah, Bruce Payne is a favorite of mine. He's kind of one who had a huge piece in like starting my site off, because there were these two women that had a site called Bruce's Angels. They were huge Bruce Payne fans, and when I first started doing the blog, I was doing Bruce Payne films, and they were like one of the first people who like started linking my site other places and things like that. So when I heard that Bruce Payne was in it, I just had, and of course, my big thing with Bruce Payne is I don't like it when he plays Americans, because I feel like that kind of, I mean, he does a great American accent, but I feel like it's not as much fun. And so, yeah, seeing him in a real UK production where he gets to play an English gangster, I thought was much more fun.
Yeah, and that's that's a good example of one of those where you get an actor in and you really make good use of him, because you know he's in pretty much one or two locations in the film. And they shot this sort of in the midst of lockdowns and things. So just as the restrictions were just easing enough that they could shoot, they went and shot the film. So it was kind of produced, shot, released, all within the window of, you know, lockdown and COVID, which is quite impressive, I think. But yeah, I mean, they made really good use of, you know, Bruce, Nick, Janine's really good in it as well. It's just, they did a really good job of that. I was really impressed.
Yeah, I was as well. I mean, I think the home invasion movie, for me, I think it's kind of a hard thing to pull off, because it's like, you know, how much can you sort of do in that home invasion window that doesn't feel like it's spinning its wheels? Like how long can you take it before it starts to get there? And I think, you know, the kind of splitting the difference the way they did, where the first half of it was more sort of building the story a bit, I thought was a good approach to that it wasn't just all the home invasion piece. But again, like the performances, I think really, really anchored it too, where you just had, I mean, Billy Murray was, you know, I always loved seeing him and stuff anyway. So, but I think that was like his idea for the story. I think according to the credits. So maybe that's part of the, you know, why he was, you know, in it and kind of knew this character and really wanted to do this character.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, he's really good friends with Jonathan. So, and Jonathan's a really big fan of Billy. So he really wanted to kind of, you know, give him a role in something, you know, as the kind of leading man again. You know, because he was almost sort of, not necessarily retired, but, you know, semi-retired. He'd come and do the odd bit part here and there, and he was quite happy to do that. But I think, you know, he was attracted back to doing Nemesis because it was, you know, something that he was kind of interested in and had a creative input in. And then, you know, this kind of leading role where he'd be kind of front and center as well. And yeah, you know, he's really charismatic, so he really kind of holds the screen.
Yeah, it was really great. I mean, you know, him and, I mean, of course, the Nick Moran and was it Lucy Arden? Is that I think I have her name right.
Yeah, Lucy Arden. Yeah, and I think she hasn't done many films, but I mean, she does a really good job in this as well. And then they've had Roger Moore's granddaughter was in it as well. Amber Moore, and I thought she was really good as well. It might have been, you know, aside from a short film or two, her debut. So she's really impressive in it, because they have quite an interesting dynamic, her and Lucy Arden in the film, without giving too much away.
No, right, exactly. But But yeah, I think for someone who sees the names, kind of on the tin in terms of like, Nick Moran, Frank Harper as well, who I loved him as the dad in Bend It Like Beckham. That's kind of one of my favorite sports movies. And so, seeing all those names there, Billy Murray, Bruce Payne, you'd almost think like, okay, well, Janine Southcott or, Lucy Arden, or Amber Moore maybe aren't going to be as good, but actually they hold their own really well, despite not having, and I think, they've done some feature films amongst them, but for the most part, it's a lot of short films that they've done, and this is kind of some of their newer stuff. And the fact that they were able to hold their own so well with these other really big names, I think just kind of adds a touch to that film that I don't think you'd expect going in.
I think this was a key point that Jonathan's often brought up, that you can watch a film sometimes, and like you say, you've got the names where you know what you're going to get and you expect a certain level. But then, sometimes the cast can get filled out. It might just be that they're getting, locals, or they're just filling the roles as quickly as possible because they're not necessarily as important. When you're getting kind of, 8, 9, or 10th down in the cast list, there's almost sometimes a just get anyone mentality. But that's something that Jonathan's never wanted to do. He's always wanted to fill a role with someone who's going to not be a weak link in the film. So and again, everyone does a really good job in that.
Yeah. I mean, I think like for example, with his wife Janine, I mean, she kind of plays that gangster's wife in a way that's like a little bit more grit and edge to it than a lot of gangster's wife, and I think that really helped in a lot of areas of the film where. We in America, I think the most common gangster's wife that we think of is Carmela Soprano, Edie Falco's character. And of course, that character is very iconic and it fills a certain role, but it's that idea of the wife who knows what her husband does and just sort of puts it out of her mind because she gets this life that she really wants. Whereas, Janine's Sadie character in that movie is more like, not necessarily a gangster too, but she's not so naive to what her husband does, and also kind of has that edge to herself that like
exactly
if things go bad, she's and I think that again, like you said, like I think casting her in that role really adds something to the film that like if they had just picked any woman actress who was looking to get into a film, even if it was a bigger name, perhaps it maybe doesn't do the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, because she's also one of the heads of Shogun, so she has a very strong creative input in the films as well. And I think it was very important to her to have some a strong character that isn't just atypical of the kind of gangster's mole who's a bit naive and kind of they either kind of go in with it subserviently or they don't really know what's going on. Whereas she's a lot more wily and very kind of strong-willed. But very loyal as well.
Yeah, I think that's kind of just an all-around like the way that movie it's kind of made. And I think again it's that kind of what we talked about where it's like wanting to make a movie that's not just like let's just get something out there. I think for Shogun, for their first movie, for Southcott, for that production company's first film, it really was kind of an announcement of like, we're looking to do something a little different than what's you're seeing from sort of independent direct-to-video movies right now of a similar type. That it's like, no, this isn't just getting something out there just to get it out there and just having names just to have names. And that's what kind of makes me excited to see what Renegades will be.
Yeah, certainly. I'm very excited to see how this has turned out as well. It's a different style of film, really, because it's obviously. Nemesis still has that kind of British sensibility running through it. I mean, Renegades does, to a point, but also I think it's more of an international kind of film as well. It's very much inspired by things like Cannon, Orion, those kind of films back in the day, which is, my era, Jonathan's era. So we're both kind of big fans of those kind of films.
Yeah, I always kind of like that era. I think there's sort of two big eras that I think of for films is that Canon era that kind of goes 80s into 90s, and then as that canon error starts to I always think of it as a wave. That wave crests. You get the PM Entertainment wave.
Yeah.
Low budget action, and so it kind of leads to this 15-year period of movies as action fans that are just really fantastic stuff. And yeah, I think anytime we movie, because I think what happens in the 2010s is we get away from a lot of that. It feels like, at least a kind of mid to late 2000s into the 2010s, it was more about let's get this thing shot in a matter of days. Let's get the names that we can get in there as quickly as possible, and let's just put it out. And I think there were a lot of actors at the time that needed the money for that kind of thing. I think Seagal is one that I think line producer Benjamin Sachs was on the Sean Malloy Dolph Lundgren podcast, I Must Break This podcast.
Yeah.
And he was talking about how Seagal's people would come to him and say, we need another movie, and sometimes it would be 3 times in a year, and he's like, you're starting to hit a point of diminishing returns. We can only do so much here with these kinds of movies, and just keep putting out another whatever the character name is, Jonathan Cold, or that kind of
yeah.
But it was kind of that thing where it was like, okay, that the actor is driving it to some extent, saying I need another thing, I need something out there because I've got this bill to pay or this kind of thing. It almost feels like it's turning back, that now we're getting to a point. I mean, I think a movie like Avengement was a real big signal that there's a way to do this kind of movie that doesn't have to be, yes, it's still on a budget. There's still the constraints that you have in making the movie, but yet it can still be done with a lot of heart, and it comes through. I think Nemesis is another example where you make a movie with a lot of heart, it comes through in the finished product.
Yeah, definitely. I think there was a time where they were spending quite a lot of money on straight to video films. You'd see Van Damme and Seagal at the start of their kind of DTV career, the budgets were still around sort of $15-20 million, and they were earning a significant chunk of that.
Yeah.
I think obviously the budget started shrinking maybe 15 years ago, but the actors are still getting paid quite a big chunk. So the chunk of what the cast is getting is kind of eating more and more into the shooting budget, and it has shown. I think also because of that, shooting schedules have gone down from maybe 30 days, which they used to consider quite tight, down to 2 weeks sometimes. I mean, I've had features that these are lower budget horror features, but they've been shot for around 7-8 days.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that Benjamin Sachs was talking about in there is that if you're doing whatever the shooting day is, if it's a 12-hour shooting day, that's the shooting piece, right? It's the hours on either end of it where the crew is sort of setting up and packing up everything that really can make the really long days on the crew.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think it's just difficult to find that balance of being able to do things where you can be creative and you can show your kind of strengths as a director, say, when you've got 2 or 3 weeks to shoot a film. I mean, some directors are they're tuned to that now and they're good at doing that. So like Jesse Johnson will always deliver you something solid at the very least, because he's kind of got it down to a fine art. Even I'm sure he'd rather have 5 weeks than 3 weeks to shoot a film, but he'll still get something done, and he'll have it well put together, well constructed.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, I think some certain auteurs are really in demand now. You think of a Fred Olen Ray. It's here in the U.S. there's this huge industry of Christmas movies that some of the channels like the Hallmark Channel or whatever do, and it's they're turning to names like Fred Olen Ray or David Dakota because they know these directors can get these things out in a really quick shooting schedule.
Yeah,
and it's well, okay, sure, they did these low budget horror films or these sort of Skinemax movies or whatever it was that they're used to doing, but hey, why don't we just turn that skill onto these Christmas movies or whatever. And so that's what you get. There's there's 5 or 6 Fred Olen Ray Christmas movies out there that I was watching with my wife, and it was kind of funny to be this guy does whatever, the Carnosaur, whatever movie, that he's, that Fred Olen Ray, And sometimes you can see touches of those directors in those movies, which is always kind of funny to see too. But yeah, it's that idea of like, can you get a director who can turn it around quickly? We always joke that Keone Waxman is the Seagal whisperer, because it seems like he can put together a Seagal movie the way Seagal wants a movie made. He just sort of knows how to make that movie the way, with all the bells and whistles that Seagal expects from a Seagal movie. He just seems to be able to put that together.
Yeah, I think, a lot of these experienced directors as well, they're used to doing it in tight schedules, but they've adapted from coming from shooting on film to shooting on digital. Yeah. And obviously with shooting on film, you're almost even more constrained by time, because there's more setup, there's more switching around, because you're basically limited to your reel length. And digital, you can kind of leave it running to an extent. So, they could do it back then, 2 or 3 weeks on a tight schedule shooting on film. So, it's almost like a cakewalk to do it, with the modern, technology and shooting on digital.
Yeah, it's amazing with digital, because I think to some extent it's democratized filmmaking. I think, right, for low budget indie film, the film that you have that we'll be talking about in a bit here, When Darkness Falls, that you don't need the expensive equipment that you did with film before, but also too, I think from an editing standpoint, if the lighting is different on a different day, it's easier to touch that up later in the editing room. Whereas with film, it's like it's kind of, you've got to make sure that you're filming it at the right time of day every time. And so in a way, it's democratized it a bit, but I think too, I don't know what to say, like that. Not that it's made it like that for directors, they can be lazier necessarily. I don't think that's the right term, but I think from a studio standpoint, they probably expect like quicker in certain products because of that.
I think so, and it's it's the shoot itself, and then there's usually quick turnarounds on post-production as well. So you tend to see a lot of films maybe that, because they've got top of the line digital camera that can film nicely in low light, they a lot of them will just use natural light, or not too much in terms of the lighting. Not to say it's lazy or cutting corners. Sometimes it's just the fact that you've got no time to shoot, so you have to do what you have to do. But you do see a lot of films that come out and they've got this kind of look like it's just been given a basic LUT or a very basic grade. It's not that it's cutting corners, but maybe you don't have time to really put your stamp on as maybe a DP or a grader, where maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you might have had the benefit of an extra week to do this kind of thing. But some of the delivery turnarounds are quite quick. Even you've shot the film and then you deliver it to the distributor, and you have to deliver it within a certain window, and then by that point they could just sit on it for 18 months anyway. So you think, why the rush? But it's just the business, really. Sometimes you don't get the time you need to make it look as good as you can.
Yeah, and that's like the studio expectation is sort of what drives a lot of it, or not. Sorry, the distributor or studio expectations what drives it. Where it's like, from a editor, director, or the DP standpoint of like, okay, I'd maybe want to play with these colors a bit, or I'd maybe want to, frame this differently or something like that. And I think sometimes we'll see sometimes with directors in maybe it's a Seagal movie or something like that, or direct DPs in those movies where there'll be a certain shot here or there that's almost like them sort of just being able to indulge themselves just a little bit, or an overhead shot of coffee cups on a diner table or something like that, where it's just like, just give me something just to make me feel better about my craft, and then yes, I'll do the rest of it the way Seagal wants it, or whoever it is.
But I think when they first started with digital cameras and there was all these different things you could do on them, you could play with the shutter speeds and things like that. And then with the editors, when they started getting Avid and things like that, the editing software is so kind of there's so many things you can do on it. It's almost like an editor now. On some occasions with some of these films, that they want to kind of make their mark, whereas an editor, really, if you don't notice the editor, then they've done a great job.
Yeah.
But sometimes I think if you think of that infamous, the infamous scene in Taken 3, where there's 14 cuts of him climbing over a fence in like 10 seconds,
Right.
something like that. You notice that because it's very intrusive.
Yeah.
And I think, sometimes, in post, they want to be a bit intrusive at times, but, it is what it is, really. There's certain things that come in and out of fashion, like the Bourne style has kind of gone out of fashion again.
Yeah.
So it's just an interesting thing. Sometimes, you can see that people haven't had enough time. Sometimes you can see that they're trying too hard to kind of make their kind of role noticed.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean the Bourne thing, it's almost like the Liam Neeson Taken films and some of the other action films that he did, after that. It's almost sort of taking the Bourne model to this like extreme conclusion that that you could have someone. I mean I remember thinking, and with Death Wish 5 with Bronson, I would always refer to that as sort of like the maybe the oldest an action hero can be. I think he's in his early 70s when he makes that, and you think like, okay, when an acting star gets into that age, it's like, okay, that's a point where maybe it's too old. But actually, no. Now with the editing that they have in there, you could see an actor into their 70s still playing an action role if it's edited properly, which in a way I think kind of hurts some of the younger guys. I mean, Scott Adkins isn't that young, but he's younger compared to a lot of the other stars who were born in the 50s and 60s. But there's a sense that like some of these guys, I mean, yes, you get like a Van Damme or a Gary Daniels who have been staying really great shape and can still perform a lot of the scenes despite being older. But I think a lot of names, you can keep them working for longer, and I think that's going to make it harder maybe for younger action stars that are coming up to get their parts, because it's like, well, do I want to see a Matt Mullins or somebody like that on the tin when I can do, you just give me another Don the Dragon Wilson film and it, or whatever, I mean, Don the Dragon Wilson's so good, but I think, like Seagal, for example, does a lot of those quick edits in his films. And the distributor might say, yeah, instead of trying to introduce the world to someone like a Matt Mullins or somebody else, I mean, even Matt Mullins isn't that young. I think he's born in 1980, so even he's in his 40s now. But a lot of these younger stars that you're like, oh, I can't wait to see what they have to do. Iko Uwais, maybe it's another example. That it's harder now because with that Liam Neeson, with what's been done with Liam Neeson, there's a sense of like, well, these names that were action stars in the past, we can just do that with them and make action films with them.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think even in the sort of the high end of like A movies and all the kind of Marvel and Disney stuff, there's very few kind of star names now. Like the idea of the movie stars kind of died out a little bit because I think concepts and franchises have almost taken over. So you're not seeing quite as many younger actors, say, drifting down into kind of the video world, and you're certainly not seeing too many that come in and make their mark, because obviously most of the fans watching straight to video action films tend to be of a certain age, and they grew up with Van Damme and Seagal and everyone, so they're there for their old heroes. Scott Adkins is probably the last kind of new wave guy who really made a name for himself, and he did that by being exceptional, basically. So you have to do something really amazing to kind of stand out, and sometimes that's difficult when the films can't always back you up.
Yeah, right. Because I think in Adkins's case, he paired with two really great action directors, and Jesse V. Johnson and then Isaac Florentine, and they both have kind of used him as their muse in a way, where they just put. I mean Jesse V. Johnson, I think his two most recent films didn't have Adkins in them, so he's kind of moved away. But I think Florentine, I think he doesn't really go too long without having Adkins in a movie, and I think that's been big, because I think those are some of the best direct-to-video action films that we've seen in a while. It's just, but Adkins also has some duds in there too, where the person he is working with doesn't really quite know how to use him properly, or the movie might just be just a little bit off in certain ways. So I mean, with him, he just does so many movies that I think you wonder if maybe there is a law of diminishing returns. But by the same token, he's got to get paid somehow.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think even when he's done his kind of, the slightly not quite so magnificent ones, let's say, he hasn't hit as much of a low as some of his more kind of senior contemporaries. So I mean, some of the worst Seagal ones, have been really bad. But I think Scott Adkins at his worst is still at least watchable, I think. Because I mean he'll still deliver what he knows the fans expect. So there'll still be a certain level to the action, even if he's being slightly let down by the way it's shot or cut. He has experimented a few times. There was that, was it Max?
Max Cloud.
Yeah, Max Cloud. I mean, that was a little bit of a misfire, but that you can see that he's probably done that because it's a bit different, a bit kind of unexpected. So maybe he's kind of done that as a sort of experiment, which didn't quite come off.
I always think too with Max Cloud, I would imagine from that actor's standpoint, seeing that movie, like being in the film, it probably seemed like it was going to come off better than maybe it did in the kind of the final product. Because I think for me, when I watched that, the final product, the biggest issue was kind of the whole being in a video game thing that, we've seen enough that it just kind of felt like that part of it. But I think like you said, from his standpoint, he probably looked at that and thought, this is a fun role for me to play that's different from what I'm used to doing. And I bet while they were making it, it probably felt like it was going to be more, kind of more unique and something a little bit better, something kind of more inspired than what ended up happening, what the final product ended up being.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, yeah, I know we've kind of dug in a little bit more with some of the stuff that I think maybe I initially planned on us doing towards the end, but why don't we get into When Darkness Falls? Because I think that's, and actually I think there's some dovetailing with some of the things we've talked about here with some of the things with this film, in terms of the shooting and those things. So why don't I'll kind of do a kind of a brief synopsis, and just to full disclosure for everybody listening, usually I'll say, hey, there's going to be spoilers. Turn off the podcast and watch the movie. But in this case, we're not going to give away the spoilers because we're kind of trying to, talk about the film, kind of get the word out about it. So I'm going to take the synopsis to a point, and then we'll dig in from there. The basic premise is that we've got two American hikers. We have Jess and Andrea, played by Michaela Longden and Emma O'Hara. They're trekking through the Highlands of Scotland, sort of on a trip that Andrea has planned and wanted to take Jess along with. At the same time, we've got two criminals. We've got Nate, who's played by Nathan Shepka, the director of the film, and Tommy, who's played by Craig McEwen. They're sort of going through the Highlands of Scotland, sort of trying to find rich people who are, might have valuables in their house because they're not used to sort of criminals coming through there. They're sort of trying to exploit the area. At the same time, they're finding women that they kind of want to, hook up with or whatever, and they're drugging them and raping them at the same time. So they're sort of doing both things. They're just sort of all around bad criminals. And we get to a point where Jess and Andrea meet Nate and Tommy at a bar. Andrea is more of the, how do we say, like the more adventurous type, and she's kind of interested in hooking up with these guys. She jokes about trying to get free beers off of them, so she almost wants to exploit them, whereas Jess doesn't want anything to do with it. They separate, and then when Jess comes back, Andrea's missing, and that's where sort of the story starts to sort of take its twists and turns.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's kind of where I like to leave it when I sort of talk about the film, because I like people to sort of discover it, discover the twists and turns along the way.
Yeah, and I think one thing that I really liked about this movie is sort of the duality of the beauty of the Highlands of Scotland, and even just the beauty of like the small villages that they encounter in there, combined with this sense of danger that's also in that remoteness. And so is that something too, when you were thinking of the story, and it looks like, I think it said that the director Nathan Shepka had the story idea, but then you wrote the screenplay.
Yes, I mean, I've known Nathan for just over 10 years now. So we kind of met basically on the rounds doing on a few different sort of straight to video action forums. So we kind of crossed up our paths over like Seagal, Dolph, and Van Damme, and then we sort of connected. We're both into sort of filmmaking. We're into the same kind of films, and we've long kind of wanted to make a film together, and particularly kind of set in Scotland to make use of those locations. So what it was we did have one kind of idea that we'd been working on, which was a bit more like a kind of Hills Have Eyes kind of thing. But we sort of established that we needed a bit more budget to kind of make that happen the way we wanted it to. Because it's a kind of idea that we want to do, and we want to kind of retain control and not kind of sell it short. So we decided to do something a bit more stripped back and a bit more simple, but still making use of those locations. Because Nathan is up in Scotland anyway, so he lives in Glasgow, and he's made a feature already before this that's out in the US and is out in the UK shortly, called Holiday Monday.
Oh yes, I saw that.
Yeah. So he's he's a bit of a multitasker. So he directed it, produced it, starred in it, and edited it as well. We kind of like the same films as well. So we both kind of like old Hitchcockian thrillers. And we kind of had this idea that we wanted to do something based on someone sort of disappearing early in the film. Something along the lines of Breakdown, The Vanishing, things like that. So that was kind of like our starting point. So we kind of spitballed on the story a bit. And once we kind of fleshed out the beats that we wanted, I went into the script and then worked from there.
Yeah, one kind of twist on the missing, woman paradigm that I really liked here too was that you kind of have the standard piece where it's the two women and one is more more responsible, more sort of but at the same time we've got this other pair, the criminals, where it's almost a similar vibe, right, where it's the one who's more responsible and the one who is kind of more willing to take chances, and Nathan Shevka, the director, plays the one who's more willing to take chances. And it's kind of interesting to see that dynamic in the film, where it's almost like, because obviously, there's going to be all these machinations that happen around Andrea disappearing, but it's kind of that idea that, like, which of the two more responsible ones is going to win out for the two parties.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think we wanted that duality between the two kind of pairings. And then, you've got another character in there who will sort of come into play as well. But the main thing is we wanted to kind of get to this. We kind of like slow burning thrillers. So we wanted it to kind of build up nicely, throughout until it kind of gets, a bit more kind of action based, a bit more horror towards the end. And a few twists and turns along the way. So that was in our thinking, and also, in the back of our mind as well, we have to think about things like, what we can do within a certain amount of time, and budget as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I think the way that from a shooting standpoint, the way that you're able to lean on that beautiful area, the Scottish Highlands there. I mean, really great drone shots kind of the overheads that I thought were really nice. But I think even just like from a color standpoint, it was great. But, another piece that I really like too is that a lot of times with these kinds of movies, it's the duality of the space, right, is sort of like, okay, It's beautiful during the day, but it's also remote and it's haunted. And kind of like, me growing up in Maine, Stephen King does a lot of that, where it's like, you drive through an area during the day that looks really nice, but when you're driving there at night, you're just like hoping your car doesn't break down, like that. And Stephen King always takes it to that point where you get the flat tire on the street that has no lights, and you've got to knock on that door that you've passed, when you're driving. What if you had to knock on that door, and what would be behind that door? What I liked about this though was that yes, the Scottish Highlands had that kind of duality to it, but the actual danger is from two outsiders who just happen to be in the location at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, what we wanted to do was, we have these wide open spaces, so we wanted it to look nice and wide. And we wanted it to have that feeling that the more she goes on and the more she's kind of searching for Andrea and discovering each new thing, the more, as wide and expansive as it is, there's a sense of kind of claustrophobia as well. Even despite these big spaces, that she feels really kind of uncomfortable and out of her element because she really doesn't know who to trust and where to go.
Yeah, I think that's really where the title comes into play for me, right? Is that the Highlands are big and beautiful during the day when you can see everything, but when it's dark, now it's much more, like you said, claustrophobic. That now,
Yeah.
Where can you go? What can you do when you don't have, and what's interesting about Andrea's character, of course, is that she's hiking, so it's not like she can just hop in a car and go somewhere, or that that there's a train to hop on or anything like that. She's really stuck, and then of course when it's really dark like that, she's kind of where she can go and what she can do is much more limited.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, what was interesting is, this was being a very low budget film. It's not like they would have the benefit to, close off streets and, get exclusive access to sort of certain areas outside. I mean, we could rent certain locations indoors, like the pub location. But in terms of one of the villages that they filmed at, I mean, I wasn't at the shoot, unfortunately, because of COVID. But when they were shooting, you barely saw anyone. There was these small villages, and they were shooting during the day. They would barely see a person, so they didn't. They barely had to worry about someone appearing in the shot that they didn't really want. But I think that kind of sense that if something happened out there during the shoot and they burst a tire or something, and lost a phone signal, well, they might have struggled to get some help, or it would have been like hours on end. But I think the locations really had that kind of sense of authenticity, where a lot of times in low budget films you barely see anyone in the films, but it's almost because it's low budget and they've had to film away from where you would see people, and it doesn't quite sit right. You feel like in a bigger film there would be extras there would be extras over there. If you're filming at a bar, you'd have more extras in the corner. Whereas this, because you don't see anyone, it fits the movie, and that was another important aspect that we wanted. We wanted to kind of make use of the location, but make it seem logical that you barely see anyone but the main characters.
Yeah, and it does fit. Like, for example, when they go to the bar, or when they go to the pub there, I think it makes a lot of sense that it has that maybe like the Hitchcocking element of the two groups being brought together there, that when you watch that bar, it makes sense that there's nobody else there. One, of course, they're going there earlier in the day, which that's one piece of it. I also like the barman himself as this, again, sort of adding to this level of sort of sinisterism or sort of unwelcomeness, right? I mean, I would, where I grew up in Maine, that's a common thing too. That if you go to a local area, if they think you're a tourist, if they think you're out of town, they're not going to treat you that well. And of course, seeing two women hikers come through from America, they're just, the bartender's just going to be like, who do they think they are in here? Just take your beers and go, or whatever. And and of course that adds to it now that when Andrea goes missing, now we can look at it as like, Jess has to go back into that environment when she already wasn't welcome there to begin with.
Yeah, exactly. And she needs help and she needs kind of assistance, but she doesn't really get that. So she's left to her own devices from a certain point onwards, and she has to kind of take the initiative. And she's going into this kind of unknown, and then increasingly, obviously, being a film that's going to drift into a little bit of kind of thrills and horror, there's going to be things happening, but she has to find this kind of inner strength the more the film goes on.
Yeah, and I mean, one piece that I did like kind of early on in the story is that, you know, we get a sense of like how Jess and Andrea know each other, right? And that really it was that Andrea was having trouble in high school graduating, and Jess just sort of goes out of her way to help her for that. And so there is that sense of like Jess being someone who is responsible, who is someone who kind of takes care of business, you know, kind of always has things together, but that also that she'd be someone who would help, who would care about somebody else to that degree. And I think that's a really great stage setting, so that when this all happens with Jess, sort of the path that Jess goes down, it all feels organic. It doesn't feel like there's something that happens here that we wouldn't expect her to do, or this is, you know, she's doing something here that doesn't work. And I think that's always like the toughest thing when you think of it from the Hitchcockian standpoint, that, you know, you think of like North by Northwest or something where it's like, you know, what are we doing? You know, Cary Grant is this normal guy who's just thrown into this crazy circumstance here, and to make it seem like it's realistic that they would go through all these phases, that, you know, you end with him on Mount Rushmore, you know, how, you know, it's got to all work to get to those different places.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that was, you know, very much in the forefront of our mind, that, you know, we wanted to kind of feel incremental and kind of build up to the ending. And, you know, we needed to kind of deliver certain moments. So, you know, if characters do kind of meet their end, so to speak, that it's going to be something that's impactful and kind of, you know, really stand out. But yeah, in terms of like the story arc, we wanted it to kind of feel interesting and, you know, make it work.
Yeah, and I think it definitely delivers on that. I think that's one of the things for me, because again, you know, this isn't always my kind of movie. You know, I generally don't watch this sort of movie. So I, you know, watching it here, I was like, you know, I was kind of excited to see, you know, the twists and turns. And I think that was the thing that I really liked about it, is that for someone like myself who generally doesn't watch a movie like this, to have been entertained throughout and think like, okay, yeah, I like all of the parts that I'm seeing here, I thought was really good. And I think it's probably a big thing because, you know, I think for people seeing this and maybe thinking like, okay, I've seen the missing woman, you know, and having to find the missing, you know, there's like the missing woman and of course the other character who's isolated as a result and has to sort of unravel things. This one does some things that are different from that usual paradigm.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we wanted to try and, you know, it's kind of an old established sort of idea, so we wanted to kind of have our own stamp on it. So that was quite important to us, that we do something that was a little bit, I guess, unexpected, and we were sort of hoping to lead the audience one way and then, you know, pull a about turn on them. And, you know, it's just about being clever, but also playing fair as well. We didn't want to sort of start pulling things out of our backside, really, that made no sense. So, you know, some sort of thrillers and twists and turns that, you know, you'll watch a film and it's come too much by surprise, or it feels like it hasn't left you enough nuggets that you can discover that yourself. So I think you need to leave some kind of trail to play the game fair, really, rather than, you know, pulling something out of the blue. So that was something we considered, and, you know, we just wanted to make something that would, yeah, have these different layers, and it would just increase in tension until the end.
Yeah, which I think it definitely delivers on that. And I think one of the interesting parts was Nate. It was Nathan Shepka playing that, you know, sort of the baddie of Nate. Is that something that, you know, when you were going into writing this, that was the idea, that he would play this part and that would be, you know, that would be his role for this?
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, Nathan is, as well as sort of being a director and a producer, he's very interested in acting as well. So we knew from the beginning that he would be in the film, and then also that he would probably be an antagonist. I don't mean just because he's an antagonist in real life. He's a wrong one.
Right.
He has his moments, but he's all right. But yeah, so, you know, we kind of knew the kind of role he was going to play. And, you know, he's quite good at playing villains. So I wrote to his strengths really, and we wanted it to be kind of have some interesting turns in the film where there's unlikely kind of allegiances and things like that. So we wanted to add a bit of complexity to it as well.
Yeah, and I think this is the kind of baddie that he plays that, yeah, if you're like casting for that baddie, right? I think some actors, I think they would just want to get a part in a film. But I think from a director's standpoint, and him having being one of the producers, that it's almost like in a way you can almost take one for the team as well. To be like, okay, this person is I mean, it's not a good person, right? Who is both looking to rob poor older, or not poor, but unsuspecting older people just sort of living out their lives in the Highlands of Scotland, but also drugging and raping women. That's part of his MO as well. That's not a good person. Like the Tommy character who's with him, Craig McEwan's character, there's a sense in his mind that there's a part of him that doesn't like that Nate is doing these things, that he would prefer that, okay, let's just do whatever robberies we're going to do and let's just get out of here. Let's not be targeting women and doing this other piece of it. But then, of course, there's the other part of it where I think, and again, with that duality between Tommy being the responsible one and Jess being the responsible one amongst the women, that Tommy lets his sort of inner demons win over in that he's like, he doesn't like that Nate is doing this, but by the same token, he likes too that he gets his I guess his rocks off, his enjoyment out of it. Like he can't I guess resist the temptation of what Nate's doing. Whereas in Jess's case, she's able to say, no, you know what? Just hanging around these two guys and trying to get them to buy us drinks or whatever is not something that I want to do. So I'm going to get out of here.
Yeah, so I mean, he's Tommy's quite weak-willed in the film, so he doesn't really kind of have that wherewithal to kind of go against Nate, and he's he likes the benefits of what they're doing in terms of robbing people, and he kind of, as much as he's growing sort of reluctant to do the other side of it, he still can't sort of put that to the side, and he can't really stop doing that. So yeah, I mean, there's a moral aspect to the film as well. I guess there's a kind of classic Hollywood kind of notion that the moral characters in the film will win through in the end. Yeah,
and I mean, I think the other thing too, there's a kind of there's a part at one point where Nate's character confesses that that at a certain plot point, had things worked out differently, he probably would have listened to Tommy, telling him that they shouldn't do something. And there's a sense when you hear that of like, well, that's probably not really what happened, right? That that's Nate, just sort of saying that, but you can't imagine a scenario where Tommy would have convinced Nate to not do anything in a certain circumstance.
Yeah. So I mean, you've got that kind of side of it where, Tommy gets pushed around a bit, and he kind of, in the end, he does what he's told, but he still kind of, he gets his end away. So he's, as much as he might complain, he still joins in. And then, in terms of Jess, she's got that moral side to her that that supersedes her fear. So she finds this strength throughout the film to keep going. And she is the kind of moral backbone of the film and the strongest character in the film.
Yeah, and I really liked Michaela Longden's performance there. Now, just to be clear, she's actually from the UK originally, right? She's not from America.
No, she's from the UK.
Yeah, I thought so. I didn't think either of them were Americans, but yeah, I mean, there are a couple of tells. There's a point where they're near the water and they talk about it being 10 degrees out, and just knowing for myself as an American who works with colleagues kind of all over the world, and I'm still trying to learn the difference between Celsius and Fahrenheit. I definitely know that if I was on one trip to the UK, I wouldn't 10 degrees, I wouldn't I wouldn't be thinking in those terms. And 10 degrees in America is much colder, as you can imagine, than it is in Celsius. But I think her character, at least in the sense of like, I mean, there isn't much about her that I think the American aspect is more of just like a way to make this be an even more foreign land for them, which I think really works there. But I also think the organic progression in the story of what Jess's character goes through, I think Michaela Longden's character, and of course, we're thinking in terms of shooting this piece, like, where all of it's being shot out of sequence from what we see, but it really feels like her character kind of matches that progression, that we kind of organically move her through these steps that I thought she did a really great job with that part of it.
Yeah, no, I mean, we were really happy with Michaela. We were happy with the whole cast. Generally, when I'm making my kind of low budget horror films, when I'm writing them, I sort of hand the script off and that's it. That's my job done. But obviously, working quite closely with Nathan, although I wasn't as involved production wise as I might have liked to be, just due to time and COVID and being busy on other things, I was still involved in the casting. So, we usually Nathan has like a core team of people he knows and he can call upon. And, occasionally he'll, cast locally from up in Scotland. But we kind of wanted to broaden the search a bit. So we worked quite closely to cast Michaela, Emma, and a character that Ben Brinnican plays in the film as well, because they're key roles. But I mean, Michaela in particular, because she spends quite, large parts of the film where she's basically holding the film herself. So we needed someone who could, keep you engaged in the film when it's basically one person on the screen. And I think, she does a really good job. She's on kind of like the verge of a breakout at the moment. She's been part of a few popular UK horror films that have come out recently. One called Book of Monsters, and then the other one was called Jack in the Box 2.
Oh, I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah. So they've done really well. And she's kind of on the periphery of breaking out at the moment, so we've kind of got her at a good time. But yeah, she's fantastic in the film, and really kind of she really kind of keeps you engaged in it, and you really kind of feel her journey by the end of it.
Yeah, and I think that's I imagine that was probably a difficult piece too, where once we get to that midpoint where the twist happens and there's moving parts, going on.
Yeah.
Sort of that from a writing standpoint, making sure you don't lose her as well, I guess, right? That you've got to always sort of make sure we're coming back to her with everything else that's happening.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I mean, that was very much in the front of my mind when I was writing it. And from a casting point of view, we just really, you need the right person in the right role. And I think that's what I enjoyed in terms of being part of the casting process, was being able to kind of, have a say in who gets the role, because then I can kind of, matching Michaela to what I had written.
Yeah.
I think, in terms of what she was, giving with her audition pieces and her show reels, it really matched kind of the sensibilities that I wanted in the character. So, it was nice to have that kind of say in the film on who would be cast in it. And again, the others that we cast as well, Emma's really fantastic in the film as well, and Ben too. And then the rest of the cast, Nathan kind of knew, and obviously he knows what he can do, and I know as well. So we kind of know how to play his character.
Yeah, I noticed that in the credits that you had an additional casting credit. So this was sort of where that came in, that you had a say in picking Michaela for the Jess character and some of those aspects.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, we kind of opened out the casting because we felt that we needed to really get the kind of the two ladies in particular, we really needed to get right in terms of casting. And we were quite set on having American characters because we thought the fish out of water aspect would really add to it as well. It might have been maybe easier to cast English actors going up to Scotland, but it wouldn't have felt quite so alien. Yeah. Those landscapes and those, because up in the Highlands of Scotland, it's very similar to a lot of kind of villages down in England as well. So there's a lot of places that are quite out of the way, rural, and very kind of sparse. So it was just important to me that we got the characters spot on, that we cast people that would really deliver. And I think Michaela, she's done quite a few films now and she's doing very well, so she really delivered. Emma was a little bit less experienced, but we thought she really had something special as well, so we were very happy in the end with what she delivered.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned about the fish out of water aspect. I think that really, I think, separates us a little bit too, because I think, yeah, as an American going there, I think if you did use maybe UK actors from London, or the characters were from London, there would be a sense of sort of the interplay, like you said, of knowing how to navigate a more remote village, probably understanding some of the cultural differences there. Whereas, I think the bar scene is a really great example of that, where you've got Jess and Andrea who are there trying to get food, trying to get this or that, and they kind of don't know what they're in for, whereas Tommy and Nate go in there and they're much more just like, give me our beers and let's go get after these women, and knowing probably too that the bartender was not going to be someone, or the barman was not going to be somebody who was going to be too concerned with what they were trying to do either. That if they're we don't see this in the film, but because again, from the Hitchcockian standpoint, right, is that Jess comes back and Andrea is missing, and that's where our plot point is. But if we were to think about that if we're talking about Tommy and Nate having to walk someone who's completely inebriated and having trouble standing up out of that bar, that barman probably isn't going to he's going to mind his own business, or kind of just not going to care so much about that.
Yeah, he's going to be very kind of apathetic, I think. Yeah. But we were kind of like, in the back of my mind, at least when I was writing it, I kind of had the notion of American Werewolf in London, so that was kind of in my thinking, and a few reviews have actually picked up on that in terms of like the opening 40 minutes of the film. That you've got these two fish out of water American characters, and then they kind of wander into this bar that's very kind of it's like being in another time and place, really, and then it's not very welcoming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I think especially the way Andrea handles being in that bar, that is very much the way an American would. That part of it definitely felt like, okay, they're definitely Americans. Like the way that Andrea went into that bar, not really picking up on how the barman was, or maybe not so much not picking up on it, but not caring, right? Not thinking it's a big deal that and then also too just thinking like, okay, these two guys, not a big deal. We'll get them to get us free drinks and not really think anything of it. I think that was definitely sort of a good American touch there, that almost like the ugly American, when they travel abroad, they just sort of think that everything's there for them, and so let's just go into this bar and ask for food and get drinks at early in the morning and not really think anything of it. That definitely really, and I think it also played a really good part in I don't know, like from a except you mentioned the American Werewolf in London. I think for me, that's a good point. I didn't consider that as much, because I was thinking more in the Hitchcockian vein, just because of a lot of the way the cinematography was with a lot of the shooting, and that there's that idea of the characters somehow being complicit in their own downfall, and Andrea's character, it's like you can kind of see the inevitability of it, where it's just like that, again, that ugly American who thinks they know everything when they go to another country, and not really picking up on any of the subtle differences there. That again, I think an English character, coming from like London or something, would have picked up on those things a little bit better. I think that really worked there.
Yeah, I mean, that was definitely something that we were, thinking of.
Yeah, and I think even Jess's character, I think what's great about her character as well is that she kind of still has a bit of that sense too, that she's sort of expecting certain things from these situations. Yes, she knows enough to. I don't even know that she necessarily didn't trust Nate and Tommy when they come into the bar, as much as she just wasn't interested in it. She wasn't interested in the game of trying to play around with them, get them to give them free drinks or whatever. She just kind of saw them as like, okay, I'm not interested in these two guys. We should just keep moving and kind of mind our own business. Which there is a kind of a different sense too from the American Traveler. There is that American Traveler who is more like, let's not make waves while we're here. Sort of the the only thing you should take with you is memories or whatever, that kind of concept. That she kind of had a little bit more of that, but there is still also a sense of like, I don't know if entitlement's the right word, but when things start to go bad, I think initially she feels like, okay, there's certain places that I should be able to turn to get help.
Yeah.
And to be honest, in America, it would be the same thing if she was in a remote area of America. You could do the same kind of story there, but I think it works better as an American. That there's that sense of entitlement that I think American travelers sometimes have.
Yeah, I think it's also that difference between rural life and sort of city life, where if you live in a city, you get used to things being open, dusk till dawn, and you get used to, if you need someone, like the police or someone to come, they're there within 10 minutes. Well, ideally anyway. So they don't quite realize how cut off they might be.
Yeah, I think that part of it played really well too. And again, it's an interesting duality, because again, with the other two characters, with Tommy and Nate, they're playing on the remoteness, or they're trying to take advantage of the remoteness. That's something that they want, and they're trying to play it to their advantage in these situations. Whereas for Jess and Andrea, it makes them more isolated.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think they're kind of restricted, and obviously they're kind of going in slightly unprepared, or at least from Jess's point of view, she's not massively prepared in what they have to do to get from point A to point B. Obviously Nate and Tommy have got their kind of plan of traveling across the Highlands.
Yeah.
So they obviously they got a car as well, so that helps. But they're very kind of planned in what they're doing.
Yeah.
Even if they've got these little side missions that kind of distract them.
Yeah, and I think here, of course, we're starting to get into that territory where I might be starting to give pieces away, because I think this is it's such a great plot point there, and I think one of the things too with this movie, for people that are watching it, is that I think when you get to the bar scene, it feels like kind of a lot of these sort of missing woman kind of films, where again, the character of Andrea is, in a way, she's contributing to her own downfall by being so, what's the word, so adventurous, I guess, is one word, but also naive in sense, or thinking that she's better than everybody, and not wanting to be as responsible. And I think for people watching this, I think they should just trust the process and know that, yes, this is probably what you've seen a lot of times when you get to this point. And then when it starts to unfold, and it starts to take some twists and turns, that I think makes this a definitely much more interesting than the usual paradigm of the one missing person and the other person stranded, trying to unravel the mystery of it.
Yeah, no, I think that that's exactly what we were going for.
Yeah, I think that was really fantastic. Now, one other thing I wanted to touch on is, we're talking about the cinematography in this, and I know you weren't as available for the production, but was that an idea too, going into making this film, that you were going to maybe get a drone pilot and get a lot of these really nice overhead shots that we saw there, to again sort of drive home the expansiveness of everything, to juxtapose that with that claustrophobia that you were talking about in the darker scenes?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So yeah, among kind of like the regular people that Nathan works with, he knows the drone pilot. So that was always in our mind to do that and to kind of, have an expansive world. There is that kind of sense that, a lot of low budget films, they have, lots of drone shots, and it's becoming almost a bit of a cliche, but we felt like, it really felt essential as part of the film that we would, make use of all these wide shots. So in terms of the drones, just getting these nice wide shots and really showing off the landscape to just show the scale of, them compared to the Highlands, basically.
Yeah, and I think it works really well, again, in sort of that juxtaposition that you talked about, that when, during the daytime, right, you can see just for miles, right, that it's just this big open expanse. I mean, it's above tree line, you see sheep kind of roaming the hills here or there, but for the most part, it's this big open expanse. But then when it gets dark out, right, that area suddenly shrinks because there's no light, there's no way to see where you are. And I think that really played well. So I agree with you there that I think you're right, that sometimes with the low budget films, I think that's that issue maybe with technology being, more readily available between, digital cameras, drones. You don't have to rent a helicopter to do these overhead shots. Now you can have a drone do it for much cheaper. That there's that democratization that I think on the one hand makes it so, a movie like this, it's this kind of thing is much more accessible to give you more options. But then, yes, maybe there's that sense that it can be overdone in the wrong hands. But I felt like here it was really necessary to have those shots.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, ordinarily we wouldn't have kind of had as many as we did, but I think, it's part of, having a sense of that scale really, and really utilizing the size of the landscapes. It's not, sometimes you'll get them in the films where there's just, loads of shots of all these buildings, and, it doesn't always feel necessary. It just, it doesn't necessarily now make films look any more expensive. Whereas it used to be maybe 10 years ago, if you had drone shots in, your short film or your low budget feature, it made it look a little bit more expensive. But now it just feels, people are kind of wise to that, because it's not that it's cheap, but, you can get drones for reasonable amounts of money now. So they're quite easy to come by.
Yeah, well, right. It's the idea of the establishing shot, right? That in this film, it's literally establishing something, where as opposed to just sort of being there to pad out the movie or add minutes to the film or something like that. And I guess that's the point, right? Is it's supposed to be there to establish something, to sort of further the story. And I mean, I think we talk about people always talk in the United States, and I think probably maybe the same thing in England. I think to some extent about Nemesis, but the city of New York being a character, or the city of London being a character in the movie. And I think what those drone shots it would do is they establish the Scottish Highlands as being a character in the film.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, I mean that was another thing that we really wanted, to make the location feel, as you say, like a character and feel integral to the film. I think, sometimes you'll get a film where you don't really get a sense of your location, or because maybe they've had confined, shooting, or they've had to shoot in, a few days, that they're working around the fact that they want to hide what they can't show. So, here we very much wanted to show the locations and the backdrops.
Yeah, because I think what's great is, right, you think of like a lot of low budget movies where it's like, okay, the movie's supposed to take place in Los Angeles, but they're shooting it in Michigan, or they're shooting it in, or it's supposed to take place in New York, but they're shooting it in Montreal or something like that. And whereas this takes place in the Scottish Highlands and you're shooting it in the Scottish Highlands. And I think, and I think too, it's important that we don't get any sort of backstory of either of these groups of characters before they're in the Scottish Highlands, that everything is taking place there. They're all there. They're coming from outside of there, but they're, in a way, I don't want to say dropped into this location, but that everything's kind of done in this sort of fishbowl in a way.
Yeah, I mean, we wanted to have the film to kind of It takes place over the course of just over a couple of days. So we wanted it to kind of feel very confined in terms of time as well. And particularly the kind of last half where, essentially when it gets to the darkness, it's very kind of immediate film.
Yeah, it does. I mean, that's definitely another area where I would tell people watching this to just, again, trust the process, because I think, earlier on, the scenes tend to be a little bit more expansive, or they go a little bit longer, and I think, again, that juxtaposition is really great, that you've got you've got the opening scene with Tommy and Nate, where they're kind of going over their plans and what they've been doing and all of that, and it sort of takes a bit of time to play out, and then of course the payoff with that scene is fantastic. I think that's just really great, but also that juxtaposition, that when we get to the midpoint and we're now in the nighttime, or we're starting to have things take place at night, there's a more immediacy. Like, things happen much quicker. They're not playing out. I mean, there's a few scenes that play out a little bit longer, but even those play out longer in a way that feels much more organic.
Yeah, and again, we were kind of thinking that because you don't see it so much anymore with like slow burn films and where they let scenes play out. So, that's very much in our thinking when we were, conceiving the film.
I don't know if you have this term in the UK, but in America we have this term called velocitized, where if you're driving, say, 100 miles an hour, 160 kilometers an hour on the highway, and then you drop down to like 50 miles an hour, to half that speed, because you're getting off the highway and you're just driving in a normal area, that 50 feels like you're going like 10 miles an hour. It feels like you're going really slow. I think with a lot of these direct-to-video movies, especially action movies, I'm used to things just happening so quickly that let's just jump cut here, jump cut there. That when you come into a movie that has a little bit more of a slow burn, I think sometimes there is that mindset of like, my brain is velocitized to this quicker style of film, and it's just a matter of just sort of reversing and just saying like, okay, trust it and let it go. And then then the payoff is so great, I think, that it makes it worth it a lot of times. And I think it's just a matter of audiences, especially if you're like myself and you watch a lot of action movies, it is almost a sense of like, just sort of trusting that it's happening a little bit differently. I think Nemesis is another one that does the same thing, where the first 45 minutes there are these kind of longer scenes that sort of establish things a little bit more, and when the payoff is there, I think that's where it really works, is that you get to the end of the movie and you think, okay, this all worked like that. It's just a matter of giving the filmmakers that trust.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way movies are made now, that it's very much kind of like trying to grab your attention constantly. I think even in like the mainstream things and Disney things and Marvel, that they really want to kind of grab you from the beginning and not kind of let you go. Sometimes it can get, I guess, a little bit relentless. And if your film's going on for like 2.5 or 3 hours, and it's kind of like non-stop, I guess it's like what Scorsese said about some things now being more like a kind of theme park ride. But our thinking was that we wanted to kind of have something that kind of slowly simmered, and then increasingly it starts boiling up towards the end. So that was very much in our thinking, to do something a bit more kind of old-fashioned, I guess.
Yeah, and I think it definitely works from that standpoint. I think you sort of, between the setting and the way the story unfolds, and then again, with I mean again, like you said, like the entire cast did a really great job, but I think it hinges on whether or not Michaela Longden can kind of move everything along as Jess. I think she's almost sort of like the central piece that everything revolves around, and I think that all of that works in that sense. That I definitely really appreciated it. It was kind of nice to have a sort of a change of pace for me, because I'm so used to just watching these action movies where I'm just like, every half a second I've got a new shot coming in.
Yeah. No, I think that was we really wanted to sort of have a pace and really build up to something towards the end, because I think sometimes I find films these days, if you're watching them at the cinema, they're a little bit one-paced, Sometimes that does work. I mean, something like Mad Max Fury Road is kind of a bit furious throughout. So, but that kind of does work really well. And it breaks up the pace well in between. But I think what we're really keen on doing was kind of having what we call a slow burn. And just building up to a nice ending.
Yeah, and one other thing I wanted to touch on quickly before we can sort of wrap it up is you talked about COVID being a factor in the shooting. Did that also play into the fact that a lot of the scenes are done outside? That there aren't as many indoor shots. Was that a thinking, or was it more like, no, this was how we're writing it, and it just sort of worked out that way?
Not really. I mean, when we started writing, I think COVID was kind of in the midst of things, but they had a window basically to film it. There was a cast of 7 and a crew of like another 7 or 8, I think. So yeah, in terms of like the interiors, there was never going to be any trouble kind of making them work. So our idea really was still to kind of do lots of kind of exteriors and make use of those, expansive locations, and then a few interiors here and there, because also we had to be wary of how many interiors we could have in terms of, budget and things like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, with that kind of thing nowadays, when you do like an interior shot, is it a matter of just finding a location scout that just finds? Is it just finding a house that nobody's using, or that somebody's willing to let use for a period of days or something like that?
Yeah, usually. I mean, Airbnb's quite good these days. So I know, I think we used Airbnb to find a couple of locations, or something similar to that. And a few of the other like horror films that I've scripted, I know that they tend to use Airbnb. And you do have dedicated kind of location services as well. But I think it just depends on what you can get for a reasonable price.
Yeah, and I guess that's one advantage I think with this film is that a lot of the locations that you have, like you said, are free, right? They're outdoors, and they're also more isolated. So you don't have to. I mean, other than a few sheep walking in on a scene here or there really wasn't much. I think there was a man walking his dog in the very first scene that I think, again, in a way, kind of adds to it a little bit, as opposed to distracting or anything like that.
Yeah, very much so. So, we were quite, I think it was quite well scouted. I mean, Nathan knows the area fairly well. So basically, when he was shooting there, this wasn't actually shot in the Highlands. It was more like the lowlands in Scotland. So it was a bit closer to kind of like Glasgow, and less kind of out of the way than the Highlands itself. But all the kind of landscapes, looked very, match it very perfectly. And the village that they shot in I think it's one of the highest points in Scotland. So it's kind of got that kind of feeling of being, very wide and open and kind of above everything, like a lot of the Highlands is. And then there was a couple of other really good locations as well that, they were all kind of within a reasonable distance. So there's a rail yard that, part of the finale is shot in, which is kind of a really nice location, really effective, I think. So that just added something a little bit different, just a bit of, an antithesis to all the kind of wide open country spaces, to have this kind of old, dirty kind of rail yard as well.
Yeah, I thought that was a fantastic location, and I won't get into it much either because I don't want to give away anything out there. But I thought that was a really great. I think the way that location was used in a couple of different ways, I really, again, kind of with the juxtaposition of day and night. I really liked that as well. I thought that was that the usage of that location. I think there's even a scene where a character is being chased along the rails, and there's almost a sense of like kind of the old silent movie that they would use the kind of the rails as a Obviously there's the trope of the woman tied to the train track, but there's always a sense of impending danger with rails, with trains and rails,
Yeah.
and I think that even that tradition, just seeing a chase through that area without any active trains or anything, I think just it's still kind of added to that pending doom.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So I think, we were quite fortunate with what was around and what was kind of within a closed area, because the film was shot over 12 days. So there wasn't, a great deal of time that you could spend traveling around to different locations. So everything kind of needed to be within a certain perimeter, really, just to maximize what we could shoot.
Yeah, and I think that part of it. I mean, I think that's the key, right? Is I think from a writing standpoint, to write something that works in that kind of an environment organically, so that it doesn't feel like anything is being limited by the fact that you had those limitations in shooting.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of the locations had been scouted before I'd finished the script. So in terms of like the rail yard, whilst I was scripting, or whilst I was in the process of scripting, Nathan had scouted it and sort of sent me a few pictures and said, I'm thinking of having this, at some point near the finale. So yeah, that kind of influenced the way I wrote. And I get a sense then of the geography of the landscape in my script.
So that's interesting. So in a way, like, it was kind of more an organic process even there, where like you're writing, where in Nathan's scouting locations, giving you some ideas like that, and then you're sort of incorporating those things as you go.
Yeah, very much so. And I think, again, this has a kind of benefit. We did have some benefits of this being during lockdown, and this was a point where you could travel out to go walking and stuff, but you couldn't go. So, Nathan would normally be out partying and, gallivanting around, but obviously nowhere's open. So yeah, good time to do some location scouting, go for a few nice walks and around the locations. So, he really got a good sense of, where he could shoot and what would look really great on the film. And finding the rail yard was part of that as well.
Yeah, and I think that really comes through in the film. So that is interesting that maybe the fact that he had more time to find the locations because of the reality of COVID. That's sort of an interesting side note. That's where that came about.
Yeah, I think just in terms of pre-production and prep, we did have a little bit more time to do certain things, so we could spend a bit more time on the casting, and the script itself was, fairly simple in the end. We'd mapped it out to a point where, writing it was quite simple. I knew what I wanted to do, which would match what Nathan wanted. And, it was only a couple of drafts, really, then a few minor changes here and there to get to a shooting script.
Yeah, now that, I imagine, from a writing standpoint, that's generally not how it works, right? Where in a lot of cases, you just sort of put out the script, and then the film company takes it and shoots it, and maybe makes changes to it or edits it. But this is sort of unique. Maybe this also, or Renegades, where they come back to you and say, "Can you write some scenes for Danny Trejo or something?" That's more the exception than the rule.
Yeah, I think there's different companies have different ways of doing things. I mean, the low budget horror films I do, nowadays it would tend to be, I'll do like a one draft and then I've handed it off, and then by the time they get to filming, they've probably changed certain parts to reflect maybe new locations or new characters. I think with the Van Helsing film, for example, there's 4 kind of female protagonists who go and get lost in these tunnels, and then Van Helsing has to come and save them. But in my original script, it was 2 guys and 2 girls, like 2 couples. So the dynamic of that's been changed since I handed it off. So I'll be interested to see, how close it is to my script, the actual film itself.
Yeah. Now, has that one not come out in England yet? Wrath of Van Helsing?
No, it's not out in England yet. I think so. We don't have Tubi over here, so I'm not too sure. Yeah, so it's not on Amazon as far as I know. So I'll have to have a look later, I think. But in terms of When Darkness Falls, that was very close to my final script. I mean, I would say 95%.
Yeah, and I mean, I imagine like, obviously, any kind of writing that you're doing is sort of important for you or to do, but there must be something maybe a little different where it's like you're sort of on this collaborative process throughout, where it's kind of even being involved with the casting, that it kind of feels like more of your baby, I guess, in that sense.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, this is why I wanted to do it, really. I mean, myself and Nathan have been meaning to work together for quite a while, and we've got a couple of other things lined up as well. So, and that's going to be very much the same, where I'll probably be a little bit more involved this time as well, in terms of producing.
Yeah, and I think it really comes through kind of throughout the film, and I think for people out there here in the U.S., I think this is a good one to just get out and rent it on Prime. So the film is When Darkness Falls. Before we wrap up though, Tom, is there anything else about the film that you wanted to say?
I think really, I just we'd like people to see it if they can. So at the moment it's out on Amazon. Probably September time it's going to be on Tubi and a few other things in the US. And we'll hopefully get some more territories lined up before the end of the year.
Yeah, because I think the guys at the DTV Digest covered this, and it's not out yet in the UK.
Yeah, no, not yet. I think it should be out before the end of the year, but we're just waiting for a confirmed release date at the moment. And then September it should be out in more on more platforms in the US.
Yeah, but for right now, people can rent it on Prime, which I think I think this is definitely for people looking for something, especially the fans of this podcast who may check out more action stuff. I think you're looking for something a little bit different, but I think it's still I think that for that slow burn approach of a film, I think this definitely hits all the marks, and I think it's worth it for people. You're looking for a film to rent on Saturday night, with your spouse or friends. This definitely fits the bill. I think this is like a kind of a fun, nice a Saturday night thriller for sure.
Yeah, I think that's what we were aiming for. So hopefully we've done all right. I think we'd just like people to see it. Give it a nice review on IMDb. And just enjoy it.
Yeah, I think it's definitely worth checking out. Now, in terms of other projects you've got coming up, so we talked about Renegades. That's coming in October, I believe. I think that's the current date for it.
Yeah, we haven't got a confirmed release date yet, but it should hopefully it'll be US first, and that should be before the end of the year. Okay. And then it's got an exclusive window in the US, so it's probably going to be early next year for other territories.
Okay. Yeah, and I mean that one looks like it's going to be exciting. I mean, I think again, based off what Nemesis was, I think this is going to be another exciting one. So definitely we'll check that one. And then also we were talking before. You've got a project you're working on with Mark L. Lester, who directed Commando.
Yeah, so I'm currently working on a kind of horror adaptation of Cinderella. Mark is producing, and then he's co-producing with another producer he's worked with a few times called Mark Amin, he's done quite a few films as well. So he produced Monsters Ball and Filth with James McAvoy. So it's going to be, we're just in the process of kind of scripting at the moment, so there's a few changes, and then hopefully that will shoot before the end of the year.
Excellent. That's exciting. Yeah, no, yeah, because Mark L. Lester, I think he's just sort, you sort of think of him from a director standpoint. I mean, he's done some of the best. I mean, it's
Yeah.
Showdown in Little Tokyo, Commando, Firestarter. It's just just kind of even kind of ones that maybe aren't as big but still kind of fun, like The Base or Hitman's Run. Yeah, he's done a bunch. So I imagine for you, as someone who grew up with some of these action films, to be able to do something with him has got to be kind of a big deal.
It is. It's just really. It's a bit of an honor for me because I am a massive fan of Mark. Yeah, Commando is an all-time favorite. Showdown is as well. He's just done so many, classic films. So he really knows what he's doing. And I've kind of had, I wouldn't say massive interaction with him because it tends to be over kind of Zoom meetings and script meetings, and there's quite a few people involved. So I get a little bit of interaction with Mark, but you just that the knowledge is there, and there's masses of experience. So I'm learning a lot along the way.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I didn't even realize because he's been doing more production stuff than directing lately.
Yeah.
I didn't realize he also was executive producer of The Gardener, the Gary Daniels film, which I still haven't seen yet.
Yeah.
But, yeah, so he's still kind of in that vein. So it's kind of cool to see that. But I think that's really awesome that you're going to be doing something with him. I think that like you said, it's kind of early in the stages, so that it isn't even shooting yet. So kind of further off in the future.
And that one is going to shoot in the UK. So there's going to be a British production company are going to be taking care of the shoot itself. And I think, Mark will probably be over to kind of oversee things.
Yeah. And one other quick thing before we wrap up is I do want to drive people also to your Flickering Myth articles, because I think they're fantastic. You had one released today about Star Wars, which I was I just realized I think I checked Flickering Myth before our conversation, and then I figured I would just check it again just to kind of make sure I had everything. And I was like, oh, there's one that just was released today.
Yeah, so I've been writing for them for about 12 years now. I'm quite a regular contributor, and I've covered kind of just about every topic possible. I think I've got a Don the Dragon Wilson one due out soon, so that'll be in the next few weeks, I think, coming out. The essential Don the Dragon Wilson film, so I won't spoil it.
Yes, no, I think that would be a good one to check out. I mean, you did a great one on Dolph. That's one, and I remember, and of course, the Van Damme one. I think your most recent one that I had read was the Van Damme one with Double Team and Knockoff, which that was. I mean, I don't think I saw Knockoff in the theater, but Double Team I saw in the theater. I actually took a date with me to see that, and I remember, she was. I don't know if impressed is the right word. She was kind of she didn't know what to make of it necessarily, but I thought that was a really great one. So I think for people who listen to this podcast, read the blog, if they're not familiar with your post, because I know I think the Dolph Lundgren one you did, the guy who's working on a Punisher book, I think he had posted on Twitter that one.
He's a good friend of mine. So we've known each other a while as well, from back on sort of Dolph Lundgren forums. So they've kind of surfaced on Twitter, some of the ones, but I think I think your most recent one on Star Wars I think is one that I think for people of a certain age, people who have grown up with a certain Star Wars, I think it encapsulates, I think, a feeling that we all had when The Phantom Menace came out in 1999. That all of us had been waiting for years for a new Star Wars movie, and then we get The Phantom Menace. And I just remember I had friends, we would go to this diner after we'd go see a movie, and we kind of sit and have coffee and talk about how great we thought the movie was, and we realized we weren't doing that for The Phantom Menace. And I remember that feeling as well.
And I think there was a sense with those movies that we were just expecting the next one to, we knew what we had with Star Wars and Return of the Jedi, or sorry, Star Wars and Empire. And I think you're right about Return of the Jedi, that I think because Star Wars and Empire were so great that maybe we forgave certain aspects. I always loved Admiral Akbar in Return of the Jedi, so that's why that one's always got a
Yeah.
nice spot in my heart for that one. But it's almost like with each successive Star Wars iteration, and I think the Mandalorian TV series was great, but I think there's always that sense of like, okay, this next one's going to live up to Empire, and I guess thinking that way,
Yeah.
that like that and.
Yeah.
And eventually there's a sense of like, okay, no, maybe, what you thought you were going to get with these movies, that's not what Disney wants to do with these movies. That's not what the current, what the market is dictating or something like that.
Yeah, but I think it's interesting that there's been this kind of idea maybe circulating around the internet that maybe the Star Wars prequels are being kind of reappraised slightly.
Yeah.
That people have a fondness for them, but I think what that comes from is that the people that watched that when they were sort of 10,
yeah,
they're now adults, and they still have fondness for that in the same way that I had fondness for New Hope and Empire Strikes Back. I mean, I'll still maintain obviously that the originals are much better than the prequels.
Yeah.
Even generations aside, but I don't think that big fans of the originals will look back at the prequels and think, actually, they were quite good.
Right.
I just think that it's the people that watched those as kids have kind of come of age now, and then the kids that are watching The Force Awakens and Obi-Wan, the series now, they love that stuff, so that's their kind of generation. And these have always been predominantly marketed for youngsters, basically, so under 20s. And I think there's a kind of bitterness, I think, to maybe a few, like a minority of Star Wars fans, that because, say, the Boba Fett series or Obi-Wan doesn't quite live up to Empire Strikes Back, that it creates a certain anger in some people, and I find that a little bit pointless, really. I mean, if you don't like it, you don't need to watch it. I mean, they're not really being marketed for people over a certain age. They're being predominantly marketed for people who are under 21.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing when you think of Star Wars and Empire, because I mean, when AFI put out their 100 movies, 100 films list, both of those movies made the list, and
yeah.
I don't think that there has been a Star Wars film since Empire that you would be putting on any kind of top 10, top 100 list of all-time films. I mean, Empire and Star Wars do kind of hold up, that you could put them on a list that has films like Casablanca or The Godfather.
Yeah, definitely.
That's the quality of filmmaking you're talking about there, and these just aren't that movie. But in a way, it's almost like expecting it's hard to even expect that kind of quality. I mean, you think of we were talking about Goodfellas earlier. I mean, how many movies has Martin Scorsese put out that are as good as Goodfellas? I mean, my wife and I watched Wolf of Wall Street the other day, and we're like, there's a lot of kind of over the top ridiculousness happening here. But we watched it right after we watched Goodfellas, so it's like, are we just being harder on this movie because we just watched Goodfellas? And maybe that's the standard that that our generation is holding. I mean, I was very young when Jedi came out. I was 4, and so for me, of course, having a lunchbox that had Ewoks on it was fantastic. But when I watched Jedi in the context of the first 2 movies, again, in that idea of like 2 movies that were top 100 of the 20th century kind of movies, yeah, Jedi definitely doesn't hold up. But I think there is that sense too of like, you just kind of let it go. Though I mean, American film films didn't really let The Godfather 3 go, so
No.
Jedi's probably better than Godfather 3, but yeah, I think we all went into that Phantom Menace expecting AFI 100 movies, 100 films, kind of short list kind of movie, and when it didn't happen, you're right. I think we started to expect, okay, so part 2 is going to be that level of movie. Same thing doesn't happen. Part 3. I remember a friend of mine went and saw part 3, and when James Earl Jones's voice comes in, he was doing a like Verizon advertisements at the time, and my buddy just started like heckling and kind of making like jokes and like the like James Earl Jones selling variety or something like that. And I remember I was thinking, boy, I really liked part 3, and then when he started kind of picking it apart, I was like, yeah, you're kind of right. Like, again, I think even for me, I kind of forgave not part three, but the third of the prequel trilogy. I kind of thought that was better than it was, and again, it doesn't really hold up compared to those earlier films that were kind of just classics on a different level.
Yeah, but I mean, I think there was just in general, they were made at a time when there were lots of these auteurs really making great films at the time, and George Lucas was among that.
Yeah,
and he kind of he's pioneering the kind of blockbuster and really kind of trailblazing the kind of film that we are used to on a weekly basis now.
Yeah.
But he's doing that alongside being in the same ballpark as Coppola and Spielberg, Scorsese when he was coming through. All these great directors making films exactly their way. Whereas now it's a lot more of a kind of product mentality. So I think it's there's an aspect of studios not really wanting. Sometimes they'll be daring, they'll give a director free rein to do something like Taika Waititi is getting at the moment. But other times, as we've seen with Disney, that they've sacked quite a few directors because they were too individual, basically.
Yeah.
So yeah, they want something that's going to be attracting the markets, and it's got to tick every box and adhere to certain things. So it's more about a product rather than creating a piece of cinema, I think.
Yeah, that's a great point that I think maybe I hadn't considered about your piece on this, is that like essentially this is like saying that like Scorsese sells the Goodfellas franchise to Disney and they start releasing Goodfellas movies. We can't expect those Goodfellas movies to be as good as the original. Or if Spielberg sells the E.T. franchise, let's say, to Disney, and Disney's putting out a series of E.T. movies, they're not going to be as good as that original one. That we're expecting a level of movies that is not really the goal from Disney's standpoint when Lucas sells the franchise to them.
I mean, essentially, they're making placeholders until the next thing comes along. And sometimes just being kind of okay is enough. Just enough to kind of keep your attention. I mean, I think Obi-Wan was quite divisive. Did you see the Obi-Wan series?
No, I haven't gotten around to that one yet. So
yeah.
I'm kind of behind on those. I've got the Mandalorian I started, but I've fallen a bit behind.
Yeah.
I think the hockey season here in the United States took a lot of my attention. I don't watch too many games, but yes, I've got some catching up to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's serviceable, or I felt it was serviceable. And it got better as the show went on. But I think what it is that it's just meant to be interesting enough to keep your attention and have you watching until Andor comes along, and then that'll be interesting enough until the next season of Mandalorian comes along, and then the same with all the Marvel movies. That it's one is a placeholder for the next one. So it's not about making great things. They just want to make things that adhere to a formula that their fans like at the moment. And I think the Obi-Wan series, to me, TV series over the last 25 years have got a lot better, a lot more cinematic, I guess. But that felt to me a bit more like a throwback to things like Xena and Hercules, which are good. They keep you watching, but they're a little bit hokey and a little bit cheap. Whereas I don't know, something like Stranger Things has a lot more, I don't know, emotional grip, I think.
Yeah, that's a really great way to describe it, because you think of like Xena, Hercules, you think of like the 90s 2000s syndicated action show, at least that syndicated here in the US, where it's like you get back from the bar, pub at 3 a.m. and you want to turn something on while trying to keep the room from spinning too much and whatever. It's like, Hercules at 3 a.m. works. That's perfect, and that's kind of, you're right, like that's almost a sense. I mean, I think there's almost a sense too of like they're stretching themselves really thin. That it's like when you think of like Stranger Things, the people that are making Stranger Things are just working on Stranger Things, whereas it seems like there are a lot of balls being juggled right now with Disney, where I think they're really worried about maintaining a certain momentum. Like you said, there's a placeholder for one thing to the next, and it's not really about the show itself being popular. It's about building momentum so that the next show keeps the subscribers, keeps people subscribed, gets more people to want to subscribe. And for my wife and I, we're subscribed to Disney just because we have the Hulu subscription, and then I subscribe to the ESPN one, and Disney just comes included with all three, as a package with all of them.
Yeah.
So, we would never drop it, but I think that's the mindset. It's almost like they're taking these properties that they own, and they're using them just to keep perpetuating the subscription process that they don't want to turn into Netflix, where they have to keep upping their prices, or they have to keep finding new ways to maintain a subscriber base. It's just using these properties. Oh, we've got a Boba Fett show. That people need to see this Boba Fett show, and everybody's talking about it on Twitter, and they you want to be the person who does it, and then that's just, like you said, just building momentum to the Obi-Wan, to the Andor series, and so on.
Yeah, I think, they're not setting out to make anything kind of terrible. And I don't think some of these shows are as bad as some of the, the diehard fans might say.
Yeah.
But, it doesn't, I guess it annoys people that, they're quote unquote woke or whatever, people might complain, or they're not quite as well crafted as, the original films. Yeah. I think with Marvel as well, it's just a case of, they're doing so much that it's, they're spreading everything quite thin. And, you're, even as far as Marvel, this phase has kind of petered out a little bit, because it's just gone kind of down after the Avengers Endgame, which was kind of so big and so massive that everything else after feels like a kind of a cast off. So they're kind of oversaturated, and there's a danger, I think, that we're seeing that they might kind of lose a few fans because the quality isn't being maintained to the same level it was maybe around Avengers Endgame and Infinity War time.
Yeah, it's interesting because it almost mirrors what happened with the actual comics that were released in the early 90s for those that, they released the Infinity Gauntlet saga, and it was so huge that they felt like they had to come up with another one. That's when they had to come up with Infinity War to do something similar to that. But there was eventually that letdown. I mean, part of the letdown, of course, with Marvel in the early 90s was the fact that so much of their talent jumped ship to form Image. So that obviously hurt a lot of their books as well. But there was a letdown too, where it's like, okay, I just see this huge, big, crossover story arc. Now what do I do? Now I'm just going back to Spider-Man, just doing whatever Spider-Man does, instead of seeing him fight with Silver Surfer and the Fantastic Four and all of this stuff to fight this bad Thanos character with his Infinity Gauntlet. It's almost like there was the letdown with the comics, and they didn't properly. They did. It's almost like they were building to it, I think, because the filmmakers are the same age, so they remember the Infinity Saga being so huge in the early 90s. But I think it's almost like they forgot the fact that after the fact, I mean, 'cause I remember for myself, I mean, I think part of the reason why I checked out of comics at that time was that it was just like there were so many that were expensive, like, hologram covers and all of these different, variants and things like that. And then Image had trouble getting their books out. But there was also a sense, too, of like, okay, what next? Do I want to keep, I've just been buying all of these comics to follow this huge crossover saga. Now, I'm going to take a breather and not worry about comics for a little bit.
Yeah, I think, there comes to a point where, maybe ideas start to get a little bit tired, and, things are recycled. And also just in terms of like the Marvel formula, most of the films kind of adhere to the same kind of structure and formula. And everything needs to kind of cram in, the cameos and your interlinking, which sometimes can kind of affect the structure of the film.
Yeah.
And then, they tend to run comfortably over 2 hours, a lot often, 2.5, 3 hours nearly.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And, kind of very, very big set pieces. I'm not a big fan of, green screen, being used so much. So it becomes a bit intrusive for me, and it kind of takes me out of it when you're seeing entire set pieces where, it's just an actor against a green screen. And yeah, nothing on the screen is really real besides, the actor himself. Or occasionally, if like it's a CG Josh Brolin, it's, nothing on the screen's real.
Right. I mean, that's a great point that you mentioned about, I mean, 'cause just again, talking about When Darkness Falls, where you're using real locations and they're these real beautiful places, that the idea of trying to render that in computer generated images would just completely take away from what you're seeing there. And
Yeah.
I think there's almost a sense, I think that's part of the reason why people were not fans of the Star Wars, the prequel trilogy, was that, I mean, every single one of the clone soldiers were CGI, that he was rendering entire locations in CGI, and there was something about the fact that the first Star Wars was shot in like locations like Tunisia, where it Tatooine looked real, like these places looked real because they were real, I guess.
Yeah, and they built large sets as well.
Yeah.
Whereas I think George Lucas was one of the first to really kind of, I guess he kind of trailblazed using studios a lot. Quite, he'd have CGI backgrounds. He'd maybe have a few kind of props on the actual soundstage that the actors would be on, but he was using entire kind of CG backdrops, and he was the first to really kind of popularize that again. So that's become almost the norm now with like Marvel films. So you'll look at a behind the scenes thing and it'll be just green everywhere.
Yeah.
They'll even be sitting on a green prop that's meant to be, a dragon or something, or whatever it is, or I don't know, something like a motorbike or something.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, because now kind of going back to with the Star Wars piece, I think that might have been why people were. I mean, again, the first movie, the Phantom Menace, that sort of first prequel film, I think it was disappointing in the sense too that it was just like, Darth Vader as a kid just seemed like a bit much, I think, for a lot of people watching it. But you're right that was also the first time we're seeing a movie where everything is being done, and I think at the same time too, he was re-releasing the old movies with this added footage, and I think that was also something that was really disruptive to people. And so there was almost like he was without knowing it, he was building this sort of animosity towards his own property with his diehard fans, kind of with these different decisions that he was making in terms of making the films.
Yeah, I think he was doing that, and at the same time he was kind of, as he did before, kind of revolutionizing certain things as well. So, it's not my favorite way of doing things, really. And I think if you're looking at action films now, for example, so much is done with CGI, even as far as sort of gun effects and explosions and things like that. And now I know there's been big safety issues and things like that, which have kind of changed the attitude even further now after what happened with Alec Baldwin recently. So I think you'll see more and more kind of films where they're not using blanks on set, they're going to be using airsoft guns, and then everything's going to be done via plug-in and CGI. But I do kind of long for the days of hard-boiled and things like that.
Yeah, well, that's going to be an interesting thing, because like one area that I'm always very adamant about is that if there's animals, like a tiger or a lion, I'd rather it be a CGI tiger or lion, even if it doesn't look as great, because it's like, leave the animal alone and you can do that. And the gun part of it does kind of, it is interesting. I think, we think of Action International Pictures, some of the films that they made where you'd see like explosions and things, and you'd wonder like, how safe are they with those kinds of things? And I think to that sense, it's like, a low budget film where maybe people are just throwing stuff together, use the CGI to make sure everybody's going to be safe. But you're right, from an action standpoint, like you can't imagine Hard Boiled being shot where it's just it's just like CGI effects on the guns and all of that. It would seem really bad. And I think the blood piece of it too, I think that seems to be for me where it's almost even worse, is that like when it's CGI blood,
it's just one of those things you can't really fake.
Right.
They've never quite got it right. I mean, you could have the most money in the world and have 200 million to make your film, and you still wouldn't quite get it right.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the gun part you can do with some clever editing, but if it's not those
Yeah,
blood packs exploding on somebody, it really doesn't look right.
no. And I think, the difficulty is now because of, digital being so quick, you can shoot films, in 2 weeks now, whereas, back when you were using film, you wouldn't be able to do that. So,
Right.
you know, not, we're going back to the thing of, people maybe cutting corners, but they don't want to set up squibs. They don't want to set up all these elaborate things when you can just do it CGI. So it's the norm really now. So, it doesn't matter if you've got, 200,000 to shoot a movie or if you've got 200 million, most people are going to do, the CGI option if they can. So yeah, I think that tends to be the norm now rather than, doing it the practical ways. I mean, there's obviously a few people like Tom Cruise and Chris Nolan that as much as possible, they'll still use practical in camera effects.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting thing. I think I think in terms of like, I mean, I think one of the things like talking about when darkness falls, it's because it's being done on a smaller scale, right? You can afford to maybe do more practical effects because there aren't as many shootings and that kind of thing. But yeah, you think of like a Commando where the kill count is just really immense and it's like just sort of going through people. Yeah, that's a lot of packets to set up on somebody that's going to be just going to be there for that one scene where they kind of shimmy when they get hit with the machine gun fire and fall down. But it also is something that can make or break the movie a little bit, where it's like you're just like, wow, that looks really good.
Yeah, exactly. I think this is why also there's a lot of films now, from the sort of 80s and 90s that, the kind of action films that used to get torn apart by critics back then. I think they're being reappraised slightly because, they do stand out in a way that, you don't really see much of nowadays. So, like you say with Commando, I think people get the kind of tongue-in-cheek aspect of it now. And they kind of like the simplicity of it, and it's good fun. But also, the way it's constructed is it's really well constructed, and it doesn't feel rushed. Whereas a lot of films nowadays might feel rushed. That goes as far as like the cinematography, the music as well. James Horner's score in that, is one of my favorites. It's just he did some really great scores back in those days. So
I mean, the one-liners, like, that's part of the fun, that's part of it, and the different ways that people get killed. I mean, when Schwarzenegger goes into that tool shed and just starts pulling out, it's like it's kind of it's like a fun piece of it that I think is always really exciting. So now we're about to wrap up here. Tom, is there anything that you'd like to plug in terms of social media or anything else?
No, not really. I just plug When Darkness Falls again, and also, people are free to look at my articles on Flickering Myth as well if they like. And keep your eyes peeled for Renegades later in the year.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the Flickering Myth articles are great, and for everybody, especially here in the U.S., When Darkness Falls, you can get that on Prime. Rent it for $4 right now, and I think it's definitely worth checking out. I think if you're thinking of like, what do I want to watch this weekend? I think you should be putting it towards the top of your list.
Yeah, it's also on DVD as well if you're a bit of a physical media lover.
Oh, good. No, I didn't know that. So they can get a physical copy as well here in the U.S.
Yeah.
So I think for people out there, especially, I mean, I know there are a lot of people that listen who do have like these big physical media collections. So yeah, if you're someone who does have, even if you don't have a big physical media collection, but you're someone who's a big fan of physical media, I think that's another way to go, especially if you're supporting indie to buy the actual copy of it. All right, excellent. Well, thank you again for coming on, John. Sorry, I was sort of combine your first and last name together, and I said John there. So thank you again for coming on, Tom. This was a great conversation, and everybody should go out and look for When Darkness Falls.
Yeah, thanks for chatting with me, Matt. I enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you again, and thank you everybody for listening. We'll talk soon. Bye, everyone.
Hear that? That's the sound of a patient whose health data is protected from a cyber attack. And that's the sound of a financial system that's digitally secured from bad actors. Right now, there's an invisible war being fought on a digital battlefield that impacts what we do every day. That's why at Peraton, we do the can't be done to help protect the vital systems we rely on. Because if we don't, the alternative is unimaginable. Peraton.